Hey everybody, welcome to a special edition of Crowdsource Politics Live. I am Anthony Straine, generally the host and moderator of the Crowdsource Politics podcast, and I am joined here with Art Black. Today we're going to be discussing, we're going to do a kind of an addendum to the live episode that we recorded last Sunday about criminal justice reform, specifically focused on police, and we're going to talk about the 8 Can't Wait plan, the eight reforms that the Campaign Zero have put out that are like, these are the 8 things that we believe could reduce police killings or police killing people, and talk about whether or not these things are good or won't actually lead to less deaths and other justice reforms things. If you want to ask us any questions, go ahead and drop into the chat and just ask us a question, and we can also potentially do some live call-ins on Discord if that is something that people are interested in. So,
which obviously you are.
So without further ado, let's go ahead and start. I just got to pull up the 8 Can't Wait website really quick. Need to open it up in a new window because I'm using Whereby and not Skype. But Art, what have you heard from about 8 Can't Wait? Because I know that this is something that's going around on social media, specifically with Twitter. It kind of became a hashtag phenomenon. What have you heard about it? Like, what are your thoughts on it, just initially?
Well, what's interesting is that we had a BLM march in town, and while I was kind of looking around for different solutions and all that, I did come across that just doing some research, and I thought, oh, this looks neat. So I, just because of stuff that I do, in my day job, have cause to talk to our city council here, fairly regularly. So I talked to my councilwoman, and I'm like, hey, I just sent you over this email, had some information, da 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 da. And she goes, is that another 8 Can't Wait thing? She goes, we're getting those from all over the place. Like, people are sending them. Like, do you know who's sending them? And I'm like, no, I mean, I didn't. Like, seriously, the way I came by it, I was just doing some research. But what's interesting is that when you actually go out there and look for solutions, there doesn't really seem to be, a lot of kind of like a big body of thought as far as like what, police brutality solutions would be. Although these guys seem to have collected a lot of what is out there and just kind of filtered through it and put together a really good kind of a platform that makes a lot of sense. Like, you look through it piece by piece and you're like, any one of these individually, you can kind of say, okay, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. And they even have a little drop down in there where you can search by your city, which is what I did. So out of the 8, my city does 4. We don't really have a huge problem here, but like what I was telling my councilwoman, which she totally agreed with, was like, if you have a good system in place, it heads problems off of the pass. So for them, they probably care less about the moral implications than they do about the bad press. So that argument I felt was going to be a little bit more persuasive with them. Whereas for, I think, America collectively, it's a moral issue. It's a deeply moral issue, and it's something that we have struggled with and need to get better at. But I always believe in kind of using the right tool for the job. And with her, I think that she really was struck by the idea that, hey, we actually do have pretty good policing here in town. But if we add, for instance, like no chokeholds,
Right.
Like, that's the kind of thing where, like, gosh, like if something like that goes bad, and like Minneapolis is a big town, where I'm at is also pretty big but not so big, and we don't want that kind of bad press. You don't want that name that's kind of stuck with you for a while. Anytime anything that goes really, really bad that has a place name attached to it, like the Kent State Massacre, you get stuff where, man, you get something bad like that happens, and in this social media age, it could be decades before you live something like that down. Like, it really could. So, it's just prudent. If you don't have to go there, don't go there, and look at reforms that can keep you out of being famous in the wrong way.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just trying to get our the 8 Can't Wait up on display here in a way that makes sense for us. Let me go ahead and do this. So let me shrink us down a little bit. There we go. And we'll leave us up down here. There we go. So this is the 8 Can't Wait platform. So I'll just read through them really quick. So ban chokeholds, require de-escalation, require warning before shooting, requires exhausting all alternative before shooting, duty to intervene, ban shooting at moving vehicles, require use of force continuum and require comprehensive reporting. So some of these are kind of self-explanatory. Ban chokeholds and strangleholds is obviously it is what it says. Same thing about ban shooting at moving vehicles. But a couple of the other ones here, if you're not familiar with, that I think many people might not be familiar with, are the require use of force continuum, require exhaust all alternatives before shooting. So that's kind of like, not that one, I'm sorry. And require comprehensive reporting. Those are the two that I think people are going to have the most questions about. So for people that might have experience in the military, they'll probably understand what require use of force continuum is. It's basically escalation of force. It's kind of meeting force with force. It's so if somebody doesn't have a deadly weapon, you're not going to show yours. You're not going to pull your gun on somebody unless your life is threatened. Then you'll pull your gun to try and escalate force on that. And require comprehensive reporting. That might be a bit obvious, but right now a lot of police departments don't require to have a ton of reporting done after the fact. So the kind of idea behind this is whenever an officer pulls a weapon or gets into an altercation that requires some sort of violence, they'd have to document it. And it can be something as simple as filling out like a 2-page list of like, this happened at this time, or it can be more comprehensive where like officer such and such at such and such time tried to intervene in such and such altercation with so and so, did X, Y, and Z, had to pull my taser, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of cities do have that, but from reporting that's been going on recently is that they're not really following it. So trying to get everybody on that page to follow these things for his reporting is going to be one of the sticking points. Do you think, Art, do you think I'm correct about this, or do you have anything you want to add to it?
Well, I mean, as far as the comprehensive reporting, what's the one interesting thing is that the gal that was shot in her bed, who I'm suddenly blanking on her name, Breonna.
Yes, yep. I'm just in general bad with names, so I am Breonna Taylor.
I'm sorry, Breonna Taylor, right? As you may have heard, the police just released the report from the shooting, and it's blank. It basically has nothing on it. So that's the kind of thing where like you can't even really, hold people to account if there's not even a record to hold them to account to. I mean, you're basically just looking at like a he said, she said with dead bodies. And that's, especially for, the amount of money that we're spending. You think about the New York Police Department. It has a $6 billion budget. I mean, if it was a separate military, it would be the 30th largest military in the world. Like the idea that you can't have like organized, concise reporting of, like lethal events, not that it was NYPD for this particular shooting, but, just in general, there is so much money that we spend on our police departments here, and yet we have very little like collective databasing, very little like oversight. It's almost like, and I was hearing earlier that we have about 18,000 separate police agencies. Like people were complaining about how, you're going to defund the police and then you're just going to create like specialized police departments. We already have 18,000 separate police organizations or law enforcement organizations in the United States that, that specialize in a wide range of high level, low level, interstate, international, I mean, all kinds of crimes that they're looking at. So with that, comes the kind of logical conclusion that if you're going to have this broad range of law enforcement out there, there needs to be some way to kind of keep oversight of it and then to track it and have metrics for it. The fact that we don't have good metrics for law enforcement, which is literally life and death, liberty or jail, the suspension of liberty by due process, is just shocking. It's appalling, especially in an information age. For
sure. Like a lot of these are common just common sense. Heather Max or Heather Ma, sorry. Thank you for the follow, and I'll get to your question here shortly. A lot of these things that are they seem like a lot of common sense, but just aren't done, have been pushed back by various police departments, chiefs, criminal justice theorists, where they are worried that having these kind of things in place will lead to the police not having the full range of autonomy required to actually tackle crime. So one of the biggest critiques on some of these things is that if you shackle the police too much, then you're going to let criminals are going to get away, and you're not going to have the kind of proactive policing that we need in order to deal with the crime that we have as a society. So that's one of the big critiques of kind of just police reform in general, not necessarily these. As far as why do we hear more about George Floyd instead of Breonna Taylor, I honestly think that's probably because of the video. We don't have a video of the slaying of Breonna Taylor, and we do of George Floyd, and there's no ambiguity whatsoever with George Floyd. There's very, very few people, even on the Republican and right side of the political spectrum, that don't see his death and find it to be appalling. Whereas we don't have a video of Breonna Taylor, so people can be like, well, maybe she lifted a gun, even though they weren't they were at the wrong place. Maybe
and she was in bed asleep.
Yeah,
so.
it's you don't have that visceral reaction that you have with visual media when you're just reading reports, and I think that's probably the main reason for that.
Right.
One critique I did see from people, from some criminal justice data scientists, or that's the new term, but just researchers, is that is particularly with this slide that we have up here, where it shows if you do these things, this is how many fewer deaths will be caused by police officers, and a lot of this is actually correlation and not causation. They controlled for a variety of factors in order to find out whether or not these have a statistical impact upon police-involved killings. But the way that they went about comparing these to police departments that didn't have them is a little fuzzy. Basically, they didn't control for other possible mitigating factors. Not to say that these things aren't good or reliable, or things that shouldn't be done, but we should take that into account when actually analyzing whether or not the 8 can't wait are things that will actually have a dramatic impact upon police killing civilians. Because they said that if all these things are implemented, you'll see a 75% reduction. Not necessarily going to be the case from what I've read about the data and other critiques about this. So that's one thing that we do have to keep in mind when we're selling this. It's a great marketing application, and obviously all these things should be done because a lot of them are just common sense. But we don't want to oversell it at the same time, because that could have other problems.
Yeah, and while that's true, I think that if you have something like this in place, it's hard to imagine that you would have that much actual police, let's say, excessive use of force.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're still always going to have, and I hate to use the term bad apples because people use it disingenuously,
right.
But you literally will. And, to be totally honest, this is the same as any military, any organization that professionally uses force, is that when you pull people into any organization like that, you are invariably going to have 10% of the group that will do bad unless they are restrained. You'll have 10% of the group that will do good unless restrained. And the other 80% will do whatever they're told. So having the kind of corporate culture, so to speak, for a use of force organization is going to predict the aggregate outcomes you're going to get. It's not going to be for everybody, because no matter what, even if you have the freaking, the German SS, or you've got the nicest, most, kid glove, hippie police outfit you can imagine, where they just give out hugs on the street. No matter what, you're going to have people who will go against the corporate culture, and they will do good when they're supposed to do bad, or they'll do bad when they're supposed to do good.
Oh yeah,
but
for sure.
For everybody else, they're just going to do what they're told because they want to make their mortgage and they want to barbecue on the weekends, and they just have a very limited sense of what they want, which is to do what they're told in exchange for some money. So I think that with stuff like this, you're going to guarantee better outcomes, even if they're not flawless outcomes. And that's all we can really ask.
And for sure, and that's the thing. Like, you know, what I would hate to see happen is if these 8 things, which I've put over my face now, if these 8 things are actually done, that it doesn't reduce it into the reducing the amount that it claims, and then people are like, well, this didn't work. We've tried everything. You know, let's go all the way through and just do things that aren't necessarily productive or I don't know, like might even be counterproductive. You don't want to have, like, you know, the police come back and like, this didn't work, so we're just going to go ham on everybody now because crime went up. Like, you don't want to have stuff like that happen either.
Potentially, but you know, you don't really think it's a likely outcome. I mean, you're probably better off overselling it a bit, and even if you don't get perfect results, you'll get good results. And as long as you get good results, nobody's going to really hold you to, well, it's only like a 71%. You said 75. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's a very fair point. I worry a bit about stuff like this just because it's kind of the kind of things that I've researched a lot, and I just don't want to see a backlash against it. That's my only concern.
If not, then we always have our Second Amendment solutions, so we'll be fine.
Hey, maybe the Boogie Boys will actually join us.
Right. So that's so funny too. So I love getting on Twitter and just arguing with morons. It takes up more of my time than I should admit. And it's the funniest thing because I'm like, yo, I thought you guys were like small government conservatives. Like, we're talking about saving money, like defund the police. You guys have guns? Like, you don't even go to these big cities. What's the problem? Well, I don't want to waste no ammo if I don't have to on you liberal, you criminals coming into my suburb and taking my flat screen TV.
Wait,
kind of thing.
Really?
Oh yeah, no, it's great. So they're like, you know, I'm like, but seriously, like, why do you care? I mean, it's in some city you've never been to. It's not like you're rushing to get out to New York City. And if they defund their police department in Minneapolis, what do you care? They're just going to loot Minneapolis. They're obviously, it might be a magnet. All of your criminals might leave and be like, hey, they got no cops there. We'll go to Minneapolis. Like, this should be good for you guys. Well, you get too many criminals and, you know, I don't have to, you know, like it just falls apart. Like they want to be mad because they want to be mad. And it's just one of those things where they're unappeasable, but it's just fun to just ask them like, I thought you guys would be down with this. I mean, you know, shrinking the government, smaller government, baby.
No, because then that means they might actually have to do something, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny. The smallest of small government people still loves having people with guns being paid by the state. Like, no matter how small government you are, you got to find, like, it's only like you're 1 in 10, like real hardcore libertarians is like completely down with that. Like, most of them are just conservatives in hiding. So we actually kind of just go that route and be like, hey, we could lower taxes. Like, we don't need a police. Like, you guys got guns? Second Amendment. Like, we're good. We got this.
I think last username would be one of the few people that would actually, he thinks that maybe a private police force might be better. For everybody that might not know, last username is one of the Twitch local libertarian personalities that's here. I think he's an engineer of some sort in these streams. So you'll see him around if you end up becoming part of the broader Twitch community instead of just watching us. He's on a bunch of panels all the time. He's probably on one right now, honestly. But
we're not yet famous. That's all. No, I mean, we're pre-famous. So you guys can really claim that, hey, I used to watch those guys when like seriously, like they had like this tiny audience and now they're huge. I mean, really, they would be nowhere without us.
For sure. So,
I absolutely just use that line on Andrea to get her on a podcast. So I just need to throw that out there. I think that's a real effective hook.
It is. It's a very effective hook. So, as far as these 8 ones, do you think there's might be any of them that, you know, we wouldn't have problems with, but might get the most pushback from either law enforcement or people that are a little more conservative minded?
I'm sorry. That what did?
Sorry. Out of the 8 can't wait. Do you think there's any of them that, while we both of us agree with them, do you think that one of them might get a little more pushback than the others?
Well, I mean, obviously, shooting at moving vehicles is like America's pastime, so I feel like that wouldn't be super popular. No, actually, not in the specific 8 can't wait, but they have.
Should we go to Campaign Zero and get more in depth
No,
into
no,
their
no.
thing?
It's actually police union contracts that they're talking about, like immediate harm reduction and all that, use of force policies. So it's not one of these in particular, but I think that none of these individually are going to be a deal breaker. Like you think about it, and I was joking about banning shooting at moving vehicles.
Yeah.
But banning shooting at moving vehicles, it actually makes a lot of sense. Like if you're talking about somebody who is fleeing, maybe shooting at them is not a great idea, because trying to shoot a moving target with a handgun is actually very tricky.
Yeah.
And it's not really a great idea. So especially, in an urban environment. Now, if they're trying to run you down, obviously that's self-defense. If they're just trying to flee, that's a good way for pedestrians to get shot, like people nearby, people in houses and all that. But it's very Hollywood. Like you always think about, like, these car, you got adrenaline, you got fleeing suspects, you got a lot of stuff going on, and it's just really, really dangerous because especially a fast moving vehicle that you're trying to shoot at, that bullet could go freaking anywhere.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's really just a bad idea. But if a cop's allowed to do it, and this is just the kind of problem with policing in a liberal democracy, is that policing is only easy in a police state. Like anywhere where people have rights, it's actually hard to be a cop. And we should recognize that, and we should pay cops better and train them better and limit the roles to policing roles. And like a lot of the stuff that I really like about the defund the police concept is that they're talking about taking the social worker role out of the police.
Oh, yeah.
And any state needs like just just folks with guns, just to show every now and then, like just something goes wrong and you're like, yeah, okay, this isn't working. We can't talk our way through this.
Yeah, crime's a real thing. Like,
yeah,
violent crime's a real thing.
You need people to roll in and just drop the hammer and that's fine. It is what it is, and that's just part of life. But there's a lot of stuff that your average police officer has to deal with these days that has nothing to do, like trying to roll homeless people out from a park bench, and people who have like mental illness, people who have like domestic violence victims, people who have all kinds of, issues that have forced them out into the street or, into a place where they're not where society wants them to be, that the cops don't want to deal with it. They're not really resourced to deal with it. They sort of are, because they just have to, and they just kind of get thrown into it. But like so much of this just falls under like mental illness treatment that we just dump onto the cops, that we should really like separate away from them and have a separate agency entirely to deal with that, of people who are trained and resourced to handle it. So of the 8 can't wait issues, I don't think that any of them are individually a problem. I think that just the overall concept of structural fixes gets down to separating away from the police what should not be a police function, and having, and kind of the joke is like armed social workers, but maybe some concept of like armed social workers to deal with that type of interpersonal, like non-criminal, but I mean, it still could be. I'm sorry, it still could be quite criminal, but it's not like a bank robbery or like some kind of carjacking, armed robbery, like something that's just like
some other form of mediation that the police are not necessarily trained to do.
Right. Or, it's hard to like multi-specialize, it's good to have people who are there to drop the hammer. If, somebody's just like robbing a bank, just like went crazy in the streets and they're shooting people and all that, like the society needs somebody who can step in and handle stuff that's just way out of control. But the stuff that's kind of on the edges, like the cops are kind of a blunt instrument to handle like homelessness. But like in my town, that's like half of what cops do.
Hey guys, we are back. We are back. I don't know what happened. OBS crashed on me basically, and it stopped the stream. So just go ahead and reload. My bad.
Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Yeah, we're back. Fuck yeah, we are. So where do we leave off?
I honestly don't know because I got distracted when OBS crashed on me. So you were on a roll though.
I was,
as usual.
I was right.
But I think you were saying that Yeah, I don't know, honestly. I am so sorry, guys. This doesn't
Oh
normally
yeah,
happen.
yeah,
I swear, I swear.
yeah. Baby, this never happens to me.
But I think one of
That's a
the
dirty joke for you guys.
it
Uh,
is.
so, oh yeah, yeah. We're talking about cops not being social workers. Cops
Yes,
don't want to
that's what it
deal
was.
with the homeless. Cops don't want to deal with, honestly, like domestic violence. They don't want to deal with all that stuff. What they want to deal with is beating people with a stick. Like if somebody is robbing somebody actively, cops want to show up. They want to see some like robbery in progress, and they want to walk in. And they want to hit somebody with a stick until they stop, and then they want to arrest them like that. Like that. That is why people join the police, is that they want to prevent crimes and or stop crimes and be that kind of force that can keep society safe from elements that just for whatever reason don't want to act right. So regardless of what cops wind up doing day to day, it's important to look at why we have police in the first place, which is largely property crime and property rights, versus what we have cops doing, which is a lot of social work,
Right.
interacting with homeless, domestic violence, things that cops are like really, really lightly trained to do and kind of do like on the job training for, but they don't want to be doing that. Like, and if we had a service that you called them, like for instance, let's say you have a family member who has a some kind of neurological condition where sometimes they act up and they need to be restrained. You could have like an older couple who just can't restrain their a son that has some kind of some needs. Right now we have issues where like there was an incident in a Walmart near where I live where the cops wound up shooting this guy to death in a Walmart because he was just having like a kind of an episode. And cop rolled in and didn't really know the guy wouldn't obey commands, and the family was telling him no, he's got a medical condition, like he's just having an episode. Still shot him dead.
Yeah. And
So
that reminds me of the other incident where the orderly, I want to say, and his ward were outside, and the ward was an adult male that had, I want to say, some form of autism, and the guy, the orderly was like laying on the ground, like
yeah,
back
that's
to the
in
ground,
Florida.
hands up, and he got shot at anyways.
Yeah.
Like, or I got shot. I think he actually got shot. And when he asked the police officer, "Why'd you shoot me?" the police officer's like, "I don't know." Like,
Yeah,
it's
I mean, and
ridiculous.
that's unfortunately because we use the police to handle a lot of issues in society that society doesn't want to deal with or hasn't wanted to deal with. So we're just like, let the cops handle it. But it's the wrong answer in a lot of cases. And this
Hmm.
sort of fix wouldn't help like your George Floyd. And that's this kind of thing where like we basically killed a guy over like $20.
Yep.
Like it was, I mean,
And,
okay, maybe he knew it was a counterfeit bill, maybe he didn't, but he ultimately died over $20. So
right.
like that is a separate issue. But a large problem that we have with police in general that drives these stats way up is that we have cops intervening in cases where we really should have a service that's more trained to deal with domestic or mental health issue, calls that really we shouldn't be calling the police in unless like, things have gone really, really, really badly. And it'd probably be better if that service calls them in and not a civilian.
Yeah. No, for sure. So I just put up on the stream the campaign zero where eight can't wait comes from. I'm gonna just go ahead and just kind of cover myself up with it really quick. So these are the 10 broad reforms that Campaign Zero has put out. So for people that don't know, Campaign Zero is kind of born out of Black Lives Matter back in 2016 or late 2015, early 2016 or so. And the 10 things are end broken window policing, community oversights, limit use of force, which is what a lot of the eight can't wait is doing. Independently investigate and prosecute. So having a specific person within the DA office that deals with police misconduct, community representation, which kind of goes hand in hand with community oversight, body cams and film the police, training, so focusing on that training aspect, and for-profit policing, so getting rid of things like live PD, getting rid of the idea that police should go around, like especially within Ferguson, and this is annoying me, so I'm going to put it over art for real quick. the within Ferguson, where they kind of took they kind of made the police force kind of like the town sheriff from like Robin Hood, where they were just using people as an ATM. Demilitarization, which I think we all know what that is, given what's been going on the last 2 weeks, and fair police union contracts. Um, what would you like to tackle first from Campaign Zero to talk about?
Well, of these, the one that's going to be the biggest issue is going to be the fair police union contracts.
Okay.
And by that, the
Go ahead and find
problem,
this real quick.
and this is just one of those things where, as an unfortunate kind of development in American history, is that we have lost the labor union movement
Yep.
in the private sector. Unfortunately, the only place it remains is the only place it never should have been, which is a public service. So even FDR would argue, or had argued, that a public service union is a conspiracy against the public. Unfortunately, they're the only aspect of society that really should not be unionized, because they, by nature, see the public as the problem. When you
Right.
are a government official, that is really the only people you have an issue with. So especially with the police, and the kind of genesis of police as a property rights kind of a organization, where if you go back hundreds of years, police were really just for rich people to enforce their property rights. Like, even to this day, Supreme Court cases have very specifically ruled that the cops do not have any responsibility whatsoever to protect human life.
Yeah.
They don't. Like, if you die in front of a cop, the cop doesn't do something, in no way is a cop liable for that. Like, they don't even, they're not even remotely liable for that. It's never been what police are for. So it's a total misconception to think that, well, if we don't have cops, who's going to protect me? Man, the cops don't protect you now. Like,
Right.
at most,
Sure.
if you die, they'll do an investigation. They'll arrest who's responsible, but they don't have a responsibility to protect you, and they never have, and arguably they never will. That's not the concept of what police are for. It's never really conceptually been a proactive agency, except in the idea that people might be afraid that if they kill you, they'll go to jail, but that's not really protecting you directly. That's just kind of like an indirect threat that hangs over people to not misbehave. So I think that with the understanding of that, if you look at, well, if that's not the case, then what do police actually do? And obviously it's a dangerous job. Police unions exist because it is a dangerous job, and they wanted better pay and they wanted better conditions. But ultimately, what has really happened in a lot of cities and really across the US, is that you have this weird nexus where you have the left, the Democrats, however you want to define that love unions, and they want to be supportive of unions, and they don't want to be called soft on crime.
Yep.
So they support police unions. On the right, you have this movement that hates unions but loves armed people that are jacking with minorities. So they love supporting that. They love law and order, and especially with white people. I mean, it's always been a traditional function of an armed populace, especially either an armed police force or the Second Amendment or all that. But it's been a counterweight against the fear of armed minorities, even back from like your slave patrols and as far back as you want to go, or as recent as you want to go. Even if you look at a lot of like why people, as far as like polling wise, like why they would want to buy a gun. People, this is a dark thing to say, but just so you guys, did we crash?
No, we didn't crash.
Okay. But just to lay it out there, there's a lot of white people that buy a gun because they fantasize about, some black guy is going to break into my house and I'm going to shoot him. Like,
It's true.
They don't tend to fantasize about shooting some random white guy who breaks into their house. That tends to be, and the NRA understands this, and the gun lobby and all that. They play up to that fear of crime, and especially petty crime, and tying that into minorities, because it's an easy scapegoat, and it's one that is conceptually something that unfortunately white America's always wrapped their heads around, is that we need guns because it's a dangerous world out there. Cops or cowboys and Indians kind of a thing, and it's just part of our national mythos. So that is unfortunately where we got to this point now, where we have police that have these strong unions that really create rules that are just gang, like they're basically just like gangs that have the force of law behind them. So
Right.
not only can they act pretty much at will, they really don't get punished. So the idea that they are immune from prosecution in most cases and they can do whatever they want, just by default, you're going to let loose a lot of the worst parts of human nature. Anytime that you don't have any kind of accountability, it makes it very likely that you're going to have seriously problems. So I think that that's the problem with the police unions in general, is that it frees people from responsibility. And while, yes, you do want to, have these people who are using force on your behalf have some sense of, what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do, because it gets so gray, they've just decided that we're not going to accept anything. Anything that goes wrong, if we allow a little bit of accountability, like our people won't want to work. Like it won't be a good situation. We don't want it. So the police unions have just pushed back on everything. So because of this stance, there's really no way to move forward without defeating the police unions. And it's unfortunate because the left loves unions and they're one of the few unions left. They're one of the strongest unions left. So breaking them is going to suck. But there's no way around it. And same thing with the right. Like the right only loves this union because this union is doing what they perceive is in their interest, which is cracking down on minorities. So, the right is probably going to be the union defender in this case, and it'll be hard for the left to get momentum to, bring them to heel. But it's hard to see another way around it because, that's really where we've got to this point, is that you have this weird, convergence of left and right, both supporting a union doing stuff that the public doesn't like.
Yeah.
So this will all come to a head now with more and more video out there, more, just random terrible crimes every 3 to 6 months getting massive publicity. Even on conservative sides, you're getting people who are civil libertarians who are like, man, this is messed up. Like we always heard it was this bad, but it's hard to see it month after month after month and not realize, man, this is a problem. Like this, even aside from the people who are just outright racists that are just happy to see it, and they're like, well, you should listen to the cops and you'd be okay. Aside from them who just honestly don't give a shit if people die, you're getting a lot of people, even on the right wing, who are saying, you know what? Like we always knew it was bad, but we never knew it was this bad. Like they had a hard time wrapping their heads around it, or they just didn't believe it. But now they just have to see it, and they are seeing it. And like Eric Erickson's a good one. He used to be the owner of Red State. But there's plenty of other folks on the right who are, coming around to the idea of, what, this has kind of gone on long enough, and this is supposed to be the land of the free, and this is not how we should have, a free society operate. So fortunately, we're getting some conservatives to see the light, and it's really just going to get down to folks like, the folks that just honestly don't care, and they straight up support anything that the cops do. They'll they'll lick any boot, no matter how big or how small.
Was that meme that I shared with the Trump hat wearing guy? Is this a buffet and it was a boot store?
Oh, so good. It was so good. It's so boomer of us to just talk about memes. Like we're just going to describe it for you, but
I mean, I could pull it up, but that's that's going to take
no. And just so you guys know, we sexually identify as boomers, so it's fine.
It's all right. So one of the things I wanted to kind of point out from what you were saying is the left support of unions in general, and right. I actually had a kind of a conversation with the ex-head of the was it National Nurses? Yeah, National Nurses United here in Texas. And just because I kind of float around some activist circles every once in a while and get to know people, so I was actually sat down to lunch with this woman, and I brought up police unions as being part of the problem, and she's like, "No, police are workers. Workers deserve protection. That includes the police. We just need to reform those union rules." And I'm like, "That's not going to happen." So I don't know if the left is going to be completely against the police union, but it's definitely come to a head at this point, for sure. And one of the other things is that you mentioned that police unions are kind of like gangs that kind of just, have their own set of rules and things like that. That's originally exactly what they were. They were a private little army that the mayor controlled. And when the mayor got elected, he would kick out all the people that served under the old mayor and hire a bunch of new people, and it was literal like kind of gang turf kind of thing. So that's why I think we mentioned in the podcast that we recorded on Sunday with the Irish people having having just a bunch of guys with guns that ended
Sure.
up being given power and stuff. And the police union actually kind of helped professionalize it to a degree. And God forbid if if they were even less professional than they are now, right? So kind of some trade-offs there. So that I'm not entirely like, I'm against the police union as it currently exists. I'm not entirely sure if we need to get rid of public sector unions in general. Policing, there's definitely a more insidious kind of thing that goes along with it, because they already have power. They have the power to enforce laws, so you don't necessarily need them to give them more power to have representation. But at the same time, I really don't want to see where they're not professional anymore. They're not they just get cleaned house like all the time.
Right. And so that's the old spoil system where, like, every time you had an election, you'd get some guy who'd roll in and be like, well, you're all fired. I'm bringing in my boys.
Yep.
And like in America, that used to be the thing, like every election where like they would just like wipe out whoever was holding these positions of power, and they would roll in like all kinds of folks who were just absolute just political flunkies. And, not to trump any names, but we are seeing a little bit of that, these days, that, you have no trust of the kind of the continuity of government. We have a huge bureaucracy that kind of exists from administration to administration that has overall been a great benefit for us, because, while certainly people have ideological differences, left and right, having a kind of continuity of government where that these people are just there to do their jobs and they're not really there for any kind of given like ideological angle, that's actually a nice thing. Like it's good to have people who are just there to handle the books and not like sweat the ideology. And with the police, especially like you think about the old like the Joe Friday, like kind of the just the facts man, like that kind of 1950s straight-laced cop. The reason that was so popular back in the day is that it was a drastic departure from what policing used to be, which was really just like armed thugs who were just, you kind of had these ethnic groups that would roll in. And like I was telling before, the story of the Irish, my grandmother used to tell stories of her mother, like, we were Irish family off the boat. And she's just like, as soon as we got here, we all joined the police. She goes, they regretted the day they gave the Irish guns and badges because, nobody fucked with us anymore. I'm like, okay, grandma. But, that was a really, important step for a lot of, and basically largely, Irish immigrant groups, but other people that moved in. It was a thing because it was access to power that we didn't have before. And it was an interesting, kind of way to get it, to come to a new world and be like, oh, we can just show up and like have like badges and authority just to do a shitty job. Okay, who do you want me to hit next?
Right.
So it's it evolved from that because people realized that was just like state thuggery. Like it was okay as far as keeping order, but people realized that it wasn't professional, and so that evolved into a more professionalized, unionized kind of a power structure that was not dependent on who was in office. It just existed no matter what, and it resisted change. The downside of that is that it evolved into this, where nobody had any control over it. There was nobody with authority or nobody with oversight. Nobody wanted to touch it because it was kind of a third rail. You harm the police and you're harming public security. You're soft on crime. You're helping criminals. You're all these terrible things. You're none of the good things. And like, there's really no public support for it. Like the police or the populace was like, yeah, fuck criminals. Like, I don't care. Like, cops are pretty good. They, it's not like the old days where cops were bad. Like these cops are actually pretty good. So, it was a weird position for politicians to be in. And, also to be totally honest, most of the abuses from the police, not all, but, predominantly, cops took it out on minorities. And most of white America was fairly supportive of that. They didn't necessarily want it as a, like this overt, like, I don't know, like Third Reich kind of a, like cleanse them all. But, certainly just to kind of, make sure that they didn't get too uppity and, they were kept in check. That was unfortunately like the vibe that most of America was on for a long time. And it was terrible and wrong, but, it was broadly supported by, unfortunately, Democrats and Republicans. Yep. So that never really changed. It was always just this thing that was just kind of in the background. And as we get further and further into the 21st century, it gets harder and harder to avoid looking at it. It's harder to deny that the system has always just kind of been there. Nobody's really bothered to fix it. And here we are. It's just still happening. And it doesn't mean that the system itself is intentionally racist, which people, again, on Twitter will argue all the time. They're like, oh, well, show me what part of the police code says they got to be racist to minorities. Like, well, that's not what it is.
I think works.
You just have this system where there's not enough oversight for people who are involved, and you get these like aggregate outcomes that are more harsh towards certain people than they are towards others. And well, that's just a couple bad apples. I mean, yeah, maybe, but also it's a system that lets bad apples run wild. So, that's kind of, if nothing else, it's a racist by negligence system. So, I mean, functionally, it's not that much different than being racist intentionally.
No, for sure. And not only that, I mean, one of the things that it's very strange that especially people that are very pro law and order are seeming to be okay with and blame citizens for is anytime that the police get any sort of pushback whatsoever, they threaten to pull back. And it's like, okay, you want law and order, you want laws to be enforced, you want all these things to happen, and yet, anytime there's any sort of pushback, the police are like, well, we're just going to stop enforcing the laws, and you're okay with that? How does that make any sense? So let's go ahead and I think we covered unionization pretty well. Let's go ahead and go over one of the other ones. I'm going to turn the image back on, and we covered kind of limits of use of force when we covered 8 can't wait. What about, do you want to go on to ending broken window policing?
Sure.
All right, let's do that. So I'll go ahead and start for this one. For people that may not be aware, broken window theory is more than the practice that what has been put in. So broken window theory is the idea that society and the way it looks to individuals can breed crime by showing that there's lack of care. And so with broken window theory, it wasn't just, hey, zero tolerance on crime. It was like, no, you have this boarded up, abandoned house that's down the street that always gets broken into and people shoot up drugs or whatever, and confiscate the house from whoever owns it because they're clearly not doing anything with it, fix it up, put it back on the market. Then you show people that in the community that you care about this sort of thing, and then that will help tamp down crime because people feel like that you care. So that's why it's called broken window theory, because the great example was kids throwing rocks at windows, breaking all the windows out. If you don't do anything about it, eventually more people are going to do it because no one gives a shit. But in practice, it's been more along the lines of zero tolerance policing. And with zero tolerance policing, it's like, well, in order to get crime down, you have to go after all manner of crime, even the smallest, most trivial kind of crime. And in New York with Rudy Giuliani, that was the turnstile jumping. So when if you're not living in New York, or you don't have kind of that kind of system, it's basically you had a turnstile that would let people into to the subway in order to take the train or whatever, and you had to put a little coin in so you could turn the turnstile, so people would just jump over it. And Rudy Giuliani's like, no, we got broken window policing, we got to crack down all the crime, so we're gonna be especially aggressive with the little stuff so people won't even think about doing the big stuff. So that's it in a nutshell. The kind of reason that a lot of people are against broken window theory or broken window policing is because of the implementation of it, which has been zero tolerance policing. And the reason that is because it's mainly targeted Black and brown people, and in order to harass them and their community, and it ends up becoming over policing. and that breaks trust within the community, between the community and the police. It makes people not trust their government. It leads to people getting put into the system for minor crimes, which can have a negative effect on their future development. So snot-nosed teenager does something stupid, instead of being slapped on the wrist and taken home and being like, you got to do community service now, they go to juvenile hall and then become a hardened criminal, because the system just keeps churning them out and grinding them and doing that sort of thing. So, but the reason that we have this is because a lot of people want to say that it was racism, but a lot of people want to say, like, oh, we don't actually support these things as a society. That is not my experience. My experience in this is that a lot of people are like, yeah, fuck criminals. Come down hard on them. You got to show that you're tough on crime. And we don't believe in rehabilitation. We believe that you punish somebody for doing wrong, and the fear of punishment actually reduces crime. Art, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, as far as broken policing and all that, or broken window policing and all that, the issue is that you're kind of criminalizing poverty, and
sure.
That's super easy to do. Poverty is expensive. Like, if you can't afford to keep certain things up, then it makes you an easy target for a system that basically, will get you for not doing certain things. And that, I think, is the long and short of it. Especially when you're looking at, you're already kind of looking at the poor or minority areas as problem areas. You've already kind of framed the problem as, this is where the problem is. You're not saying, well, what about like financial crime? What about white collar crime? Like, what about the stuff where people are losing homes? Like, there's all kinds of different aspects of crime you could look at. But when you choose to target a certain group of people, it doesn't matter who you target. I think Warren Buffett once said that if a cop car follows you for 500 miles, you're getting a ticket for something. And that's really the thing. Like, whoever the police decide to focus on, that's where they're going to find crimes, because everybody's a criminal. Like, if a cop followed me around for 500 miles, yeah, I'd probably, not stop fully for a stop sign. I'd probably, speed, 18 times. Like, even if you're only going a mile or two over the limit, like, if you hyper focus on anything, you will catch people for all kinds of things. And then that's going to build stats. A lot of the times you hear the 1350, as far as Black Americans are 13% of the population, but 50% of violent crime. Anytime where you focus on one segment of the society and you just drill down on them for law enforcement, you're going to blow those stats up, because, yeah, I mean, certainly you're going to get a lot of police interaction if the police are trying to interact with them. So I think that's probably your biggest problem with your broken windows policing, is that you've just decided that you're going to ignore other types of crime. This is one of the things people are like, we can't disband the police. Who's going to take care of rape? Police don't really do a good job with rape right now. They don't do a good job with sexual assault, with domestic violence. Like, yeah, I mean, obviously that would be terrible if the police weren't doing a good job with it, but they're not doing a good job with it. So, this idea of broken windows policing is just saying that we have the focus down to the very lowest level with the idea that it will help everything. But it's hard to say that that's really true. And it's more likely the case that you're simply letting other people get away with the crimes because you're focused on smaller crimes that are really not that important. So there's that.
Sorry, guys, we lost audio there for a second. Yeah, no, that's very much true, especially with the whole being criminalizing poverty, and I think that's a very much big point for it. I think one of the other things that people should remember, though, is that broken window policing, what people are actually complaining about is zero tolerance policing. If broken window policing was done in a community policing framework, which is what Campaign Zero would like to do, or at least one of the things that they focus on, it wouldn't be zero tolerance. It would be community services. It would be, helping with job training. It would be helping with connecting an old person to, say, an old person had an issue with their electricity for whatever reason, either not being able to pay a bill or it just went out, and they would be able to call the police, and the police would hook them up with the service that would help them turn their lights back on. So it can be things like that, but it hasn't historically. So I think that's one of the primary things that people should actually remember with this. What else? What else should we cover? I think training. I think training is a big one. What do you think, Art? We should cover training too?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. Let's cover training. So since we covered broken window policing, a lot of police departments in the United States, training is focused almost exclusively on on taking care of crime itself and not so much community aspects of it. And they spend, I think it's 16 to 20 weeks is the average. There's the average amount of a police officer spends in the academy, and then they're usually under training with a more experienced officer for I think it's a year, but they're actually out in the community doing police work. They're not, but they're not by themselves. They're basically shadowing another officer that's supposed to be able to know the right thing, but as we saw with George Floyd, don't always know the right thing. For those that might not be aware, two of the police officers that were involved in George Floyd's death it was like their first or second week on the job, and that is appalling that they didn't know to intervene. But at the same time, given the training that they get, not at all surprising, because they're told in the academy, listen to your superior officer. Your superior officer knows what they're doing. They've been in the field for a long time, and they know what's what. Show deference to them. It's kind of the whole mentality. It kind of not. Art and I are both former military, so take this with knowing that. But it's kind of like how people in the military are told, you listen to your superior officer, without the whole, hey, don't listen to unlawful orders being drilled into your head every day for, a year.
Well, and just to throw this out here, we have like this bizarre system of licensing in the U.S., which a lot of times is just kind of a shakedown for states to get money. To get a cosmetology degree in the U.S., you generally need 9 months to a year of training and certification. To be a police officer, you need approximately 5 months. So
it's ridiculous.
Across the board, there's all kinds of systems out there or job fields out there where you need, weeks and weeks or months and months of training to be, licensed to, it's occupational licensing, which is a big thing libertarians are big about, because in a lot of cases, it's just the state just shaking you down for money to get some kind of certification that they can charge you for annually. It's just a fundraiser. But then you have things like the police where it's like, oh yeah, just spend a couple weeks at the academy, you'll be good. Or a couple months, and we'll call it a day. Cops get more firearm training than they do training to handle, for instance, like domestic or mental health issues. Mm-hmm. Even though most cops can go an entire career without having to actually pull their firearm and engage in some kind of a gunfight, to say nothing of actually shoot somebody. But cops are going to be out there every day dealing with domestic violence, dealing with mental illness, dealing with all kinds of things they're just honestly just not trained for. So it's really unfortunate that we have people who are not properly trained dealing with stuff that nobody else wants to deal with, but we don't even want to bother to train them to deal with it. Like, it's bad enough that we're making them do it, but we're not really giving them the tools to do it with, which is leading to a lot of these issues.
No, yeah, and the thing is, like you said, you can go an entire career without ever shooting, let alone shooting your weapon in the field as a police officer. I think the last time I looked up, the average time that a police officer gets training for de-escalation is something like 8 hours a year. Some departments have 40, it's a long range, but like the average is like 10 or so. And the amount of weapons training they get is like almost every day.
Mhm.
Anytime that they want to be able to go to the range to shoot their weapon, to practice, they get the opportunity to, and they have competitions in order to have shooting competitions, just like some people, just regular Joes that like shooting guns. They have competitions. Police officers will have inter police agent or officer training, and these competitions, and it happens like yearly. It's like they do it almost as often as the whole like fireman versus police officer softball game. Like it's that common. And whether or not the police officer gets any sort of de-escalation training, they don't get enough at all. And like Art said, the majority of time that a police officer spends is on patrol and just basically talking to regular people. Whether or at least it was like, they might not get out of their cars very much anymore. They're probably doing most of their time now is probably like traffic stops. Really? You're going to spend like every day shooting, and you can't find 40 hours in a year, like 2 weeks, a week pay period. You can't find a week pay period in a year in order to do de-escalation training. You can't find a week pay period in a year to do some sort of additional training on like how to talk to people that you might not always know. You can't be in the community getting to know the leaders, the people living in the community. You can't find that kind of time. I mean, come on, that's bullshit.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the argument behind the instead of calling 911, having like a 912
Yeah.
for things that don't necessarily require guys with guns to roll in and handle. There's a issue of oh gosh, what's his name? Kelly Thomas in California. It was in Fullerton. It was basically this mentally ill guy living on the streets. Homeless guy, but homeless because he was just severely mentally ill. He's not violent, had no history of violence, but he also wasn't really good with following commands because he was just mentally ill. He wasn't a jerk or anything, but the cops rolled up and they tried to search him for something, and they thought that he was giving them attitude. And, they basically threatened him, and he didn't know how to respond because he was mentally ill. So he basically kept like not being violent, but not complying. And he kept sitting down when they tell him to stand. And he was trying to surrender in his own way, but he's just mentally ill and living on the streets. So long story short, they beat him to death because he just kept not doing, what they asked, but, in a non-violent way. Like he never like attacked them or he never did anything hostile. They just kept pummeling on him until he eventually died. So it's a barbaric thing for a modern advanced society like ours to, have police that are that woefully untrained and that aggressive that they just don't know how to handle situations like that. And it really speaks to the fact that like they shouldn't be doing it, and we should have a separate, defund the police. Like if we need to slash their budget in half and create a new, service that handles things like that, we should just do that, because obviously the police don't get it, and they're never going to. Like if they were going to get it, they would have got it by now. It's just not what the police are being trained to do. And the police unions only care about force protection. All they care about is how many cops don't die. Like as long as cops don't die, their mission's a success. They couldn't care less about the public at large. Like that's not their job. I mean, they really don't. They care about keeping police safe. And while that's admirable in a certain sense, it doesn't help society. And it's probably a net detriment to the police unions that they care so little about society that they won't do anything to, any concessions, any work with the general public as far as reducing these kind of incidents. They just don't care, and they're never going to give in. So that being the case, we need to look at some other options, and if that involves less police and more of something else, then we need to do that.
And it's a really sad thing too that it's come to this, because one of the best deterrents for crime is the actual likelihood of being caught. It doesn't really matter how, I mean, there's some play with how severe punishment is, but throughout history, we can know that if you're going to torture someone to death, that's not going to stop petty crime. Like it just doesn't. You just torture them to death for being committing petty crime. Like that's how criminal justice theory has gone through like the last 20 or 30 years, is that just looking at the crime rates, and they showed the most barbaric kind of punishments had also accompanied with the most barbaric crimes that you could think of, absent genocide and that sort of thing.
Huh.
Oh, my dog's growling in the background. She got a bath today. But the and actually having more police officers doing more patrolling and not fucking up their job would lead to actual less crime, because it increases the likelihood of being caught, and that actually deters people. So like them not getting it, even despite in my I got a criminal justice degree, right? So I've been studying this since 2004, and we're still talking about the same problems, the exact same fucking problems. Go ahead.
Okay, I have to cut in with this because this is just breaking news right now. Rand Paul introduces the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act, a bill to end no-knock warrants.
Woo! Go Rand Paul.
No, fuck Rand Paul.
No, fuck him. But yeah. I'm just saying.
But seriously. So, and for the most recent instance of that, just so you realize why I just said fuck Rand Paul, is that there's currently an anti-lynching bill that he is personally holding up, because he is afraid that if you agree to this bill, then if you bump a black person on the street and give them a bruise, you could go to federal prison for 10 years for lynching them.
Yeah, it's
nobody else who's read this bill thinks that that's true. Like no other Republican, no conservative, everyone looks at it and goes, that's not true. But Rand's like, well, I don't know. I feel like this is a problem. Rand Paul's just fucking racist. But sorry.
I mean, his dad is, at least.
he just doesn't want to make lynching a federal crime, and he's just going to lie about the reasons. That's fine. But when introducing a bill to end no-knock warrants, honestly, that's fantastic. So,
go ahead. Sorry, you weren't finished.
Okay, so Paul's legislation, titled the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act, would prohibit federal law enforcement from carrying out a warrant, quote, until after the officer provide notice of his or her authority and purpose. So no knock means you don't tell people you're there. You show up, you break down their door, and you go in and arrest them. A lot of times what has happened is that they are at the wrong place.
Yeah.
This happens to cops all the freaking time. So they roll in on people who are not expecting them, but who also aren't doing anything wrong. And the cops are amped up thinking that they're raiding, some crazy cartel lab or something. And it's really just some asshole watching TV who stands up and gets shot for doing nothing. It happens all the freaking time, and the cops are immune, so you can't even get them in trouble for shooting the wrong person. In most cases, every now and then, there's some outlier. People well, she went to jail. There's some cop in Texas who showed up drunk, went to the wrong apartment, and shot some guy in his own house. So there are rare cases. Yeah, there's rare cases where it happens, but in most cases, you just show up and shoot grandma in the wrong house, and then they're like, "Oops." So, more power to Rand Paul if he can pull this one off, because no-knock raids are ridiculous and they shouldn't exist in democratic society. It's a terrible thing. So
yeah, it's
good.
It's just dumb. I think it's one of those things that's actually included in the Democrats' House bill is one of the things that they also want. So I'm fairly certain that it's both in this case.
Yeah, and it may even just be one of those things where he's trying to divert from the main bill by having a side bill and then saying, well, we don't need this bill because it did that. But, it's one of those things where if George Taylor's death, if the only thing we got out of that was an end to no-knock raids, we would still save people every year who just get shot by accident by cops who are breaking down doors, going in guns blazing,
right.
Often at the wrong place. And even if they're at the right place, for a lot of these drug raids, you're talking about snitches who aren't super reliable. And sometimes they're just saying stuff because they're trying to cut a deal. They're trying to get a reduced sentence, or they're just trying to mess with somebody they don't like. So, they're just giving the best of information that they have, which may or may not be true at all. But you're either getting the wrong people killed, or you're getting the wrong people killed, or very occasionally you're just getting, a good, tip on something that probably shouldn't be illegal in the first place. So, and the war on drugs.
And the war on drugs, for sure. And that's one of the things I think is actually in the, is it in the Campaign Zero?
I
It
don't
is
know, but
not. I just pulled it up. You can't see it. I'm sorry, but I just put it up on the stream, and it is actually not. But Campaign Zero has already had one. I would say kind of a success. They were one of the first groups of people to kind of demand body cameras for policing, and even though it doesn't seem to reduce police violence at all, it does help at least prove that it's happening. So there is that.
yeah, the thing with body cameras is that cops often turn them off,
That's
and they
true.
often turn them off in groups. And unfortunately, even when they don't turn them off, people are like, "Yep, we sure beat that guy to death." Oh well, you know. So the one thing that it is doing is that cops are getting so used to being filmed, and even though you see certain places like the Tucson city council voted to ban like filming cops or whatever, by and large, there are so many cameras out there these days, even on the cops, but also on street corners, on phones. I mean, at some point, like cars are going to have, there's going to be cameras everywhere. It's going to be unavoidable that you aren't going to get filmed, and that film will get on the internet. And you're just past the point where you can even ban it. It's just everywhere. And the more people see it, it'll be harder and harder to avoid it. And I think that's really what's going to cause change is just the fact that, a story is one thing, but like seeing it with your own eyes and just watching the cops like just kill somebody on the side of the street, it gets really, really hard, even for the strongest cop backer to be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Like, and if you see it enough times, it gets harder and harder to say, it's just a few bad apples. Like, past a certain point, it's not a few bad apples. You're just seeing the same thing over and over and over again. And you're seeing a system that doesn't bring these guys to check. And at a certain point, you're not even seeing criminals do crime. You're only seeing cops do crime. So it really, if this runs long enough, it's just going to gradually turn people further and further and further against cops.
Yeah.
So it's really in the cops' best interest, just like with the military. Like with the military, like the use of force restrictions, while it's very frustrating, and I'll say that as someone who spent more than a long weekend in Iraq and Afghanistan, having a tight rule of engagement is a pain. But what's really a pain is having a system where everyone assumes that you're a war criminal. Like, if you try really hard to minimize damage and destruction, even though that's difficult, and even though you're going to cause a lot of damage and death and destruction, even trying to be gentle, because there's no way to be, to have no mistakes, no problems at all, it could be so much worse. Like, it really, you guys have no idea how badly, even seeing the police on the streets in like DC, the military doesn't want to be involved in that. Like, the military's good reputation could vanish overnight. Like, you could see a couple things that you would never forget and you would hate them forever. Like, it would never change. There's not a general in the army that wants anything to do with that. Like, they fully understand how long it took to build this good reputation and how instantly we could lose it for decades or longer. Like, it could be generational. So it's, the police, unfortunately, are in that position where once they start losing that fight, that kind of PR fight, they're going to have a really, really hard time getting it back. And they might not. Like, you just might be unable to get it back entirely. Like, you might have to totally reform, like change uniforms, change up everything.
That's kind of why we have people that are pro defund the police, but also pro abolish the police for sure. They think that there's no saving the institution of policing throughout because of its bad history. I was trying to think of a different word, but not a big deal. Because of its history, and just be like, no, tabula rasa, man, get rid of it, start over, no saving it. Can't reform the culture if you keep the same people on the law enforcement team, and can't do anything like that. So,
right.
So besides the eight can't wait and Campaign Zero pushes for just police reform itself, what other things do you think should be done that might not be mentioned or thought about much by other people?
I mean, in addition to the 8 can't wait stuff?
In addition to the 8 can't wait stuff, in addition to the Campaign Zero thing, excuse me, in addition to the Campaign Zero things, we didn't talk about demilitarization or fair. We talked about police contracts. We didn't talk about community representation or community oversight boards. but we talked about pretty much. We talked a little bit about and for-profit policing. So we talked about pretty much all of it. But I'm sure there's other stuff. Is there anything that you can think of?
Well, I mean, I like the demilitarization. I mean, the 1033 program that started in the late 90s basically moved surplus military gear to the police so that the defense contractors could sell new military gear to the military. So by making sure that it was rotated out, you'd have stuff that was not cutting edge, but still super effective that you're funneling into civilian hands so you could keep selling new stuff to the military, which always loves spending money on the newest toys. So that, I think, is a primary problem in that when you give people kind of the old clothes make the man sort of a paradigm, when you put people in body armor and helmets and give them long guns, they assume that they are door kickers, and they go into that mindset of, oh, like, we're here to tear shit up. Like, we see the civilian populace as almost like an occupying army where you've got a field of natives and there's insurgents out there and you don't know who's who. So you're just going to be a dick to everybody because any of them could turn bad on you at any moment. Like, it's the absolute wrong mindset, especially when you're in an armored vehicle and you're isolated. You only interact with people within like your unit. It's very, very similar to how life is like for an occupying military. So that is a terrible mistake for a police force, but it's the kind of model that makes people feel like, oh, like, we want our police to be better and better and better. So we're going to make them harder and harder. We're going to make them more like the military. Like, we're going to raise their game. But it's the wrong sport. Like, you're raising your game in a field of endeavor that they shouldn't be raised in. Like, they actually have a different skill set that society wants, but you can't sell them high-tech toys, making them like social workers with guns. Like, and what we need are social workers with guns. We need people that understand humans, that can keep the peace, and that can de-escalate problems. And there aren't really like, high-tech like solutions for that. Like, that's just interpersonal skills and training. And that's not like armored vehicles. Like, you can make, a couple $100,000 on an armored vehicle sale. What are you going to make off of like, being able to give like a, empathic, discussion with a homeless man? Like, it's hard to monetize that. So unfortunately, like, the whole industry is set up to make money. It's not set up to get results. So we need to figure out a way that disincentivizes just this idea that, success is in dollars spent towards this objective. And instead, success is statistics as far as like reducing homelessness, reducing violence, like lower police, either, killings, beatings, harassment, even pulling people over. Like, it's such a fundraiser to just pull people over and write them a ticket. But that whole model just ensures that you're going to have interactions with people who, and there are studies. There's actually studies out there that police are 20% more likely to pull over black drivers than they are white drivers, and they're twice as likely to be searched. Now, you can argue that, I don't know, you might find black drivers who are twice as likely to, have like, weed on them. It's stupid, but just work with me on this. Just pretend that a cop happens to smell, drugs or has some reason to search if you pull over more black drivers. It's not correct, but just whatever. But how do you argue that blacks are 20% worse drivers? Like, that alone should be like super obvious that, if you look at 100 million traffic stops and you get 20% more blacks pulled over, like, then clearly something is broken in the system. And unless you're just trying to argue that no, it's some genetic thing, they're just bad drivers. I don't know. It's so obviously a racially biased system. And then you get into like the search rates, where cops can just whip up some reason to search people. And again, if you search every car that goes by, you're going to find stuff. In a society based off of civil rights, you're going to miss the occasional dead body in the trunk because cops just don't have the right to search everybody. They just don't. Like, every now and then you're going to get some serial killer who would have been caught if we had a system where 100% of the cars were searched. We just don't live in that world. But if you live in this world where like white cars don't get searched, but black cars get searched, you're going to find more crime from black people because that's how searching works. It works for anything. Anywhere where you focus attention, you're going to find problems and you're going to build stats. And then it turns into this self-propelling logic where you're like, well, we're finding more stuff with them, but that's why we're searching them more, because we're finding more stuff with them, because that's why we're searching more. So, ultimately, you're going to find crime where you decide to devote resources. And, I think that that's ultimately where we have gone terribly, terribly wrong, is deciding to criminalize minor things that we can tag minorities for, and giving a pass to white people for stuff that, even with like possession crimes, like, blacks are twice as likely to get a possession charge. And they're like 13% of the population, but like 40% of people in prison for possession charges.
Yeah.
Like, it is crazy when you look at the scale of it and say, well, I mean, okay, yeah, they maybe shouldn't have done that crime, but clearly we're focusing on them and their crimes and then letting other people go to rehab. So it's just such a messed up system that it's hard to even see how it could be reformed without really, I mean, people say defund is going a little bit too far. Maybe. But
No, I definitely agree with you, especially on the last point you just made with the over policing and just picking up people for possession charges. Like, come on, everybody knows this redneck stereotype of the guy that has a gun in his fucking trunk of his car every time he goes out somewhere, and not everybody that has that is going to be. Or, I mean, this is guns. I'm sorry, we're probably talking about drugs, but the same thing takes effect. Like, fuck, I think every weed dealer I've known in real life has been white. So, like, come on.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that isn't mentioned much, at least in the broad consciousness of or the debate, is raising the actual standards for police themselves. I don't remember what case it was off the top of my head, but there was an actual Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court ruled that it was reasonable for a city to not hire people that scored too highly on their aptitude test, because the city made the claim that we have found that people that scored within this range on the aptitude test are less likely to remain police officers, and that costs us money for training when they're just going to quit and go elsewhere in a year or two. So we only hire people that score in this range or lower. And so then you end up getting, and the requirements for a lot of city departments is some are 21 plus, but a lot are 18. You have to be at least 18 years old and physically in shape and not have any prior convictions. That's like the only requirement. After that, you take your physical fitness test and you take the little eval test and the little psychological test that they put you through to make sure you're not completely insane, and you get passed, and then you go through the academy. And once you get through the academy, you're given a badge. Like, there's no other requirement. And even then, like, if you score too high on the aptitude test, they're not going to hire you. And I think it's one of those things that maybe not a lot of people know of, and it's just kind of bullshit. It's done to save money. That's the only reason it's done. Because if they can get people, if they can only go after people that have not that many job prospects, then they don't have to compete in the market for pay, and so they can pay them less. Even though police officers get something like usually $50,000 a year starting, that's not a terrible lot of money in the grand scheme of things.
Oh, absolutely. Well, especially you consider the hours and the expertise and all that. Yeah. But you think about, again, like you buy like an armored vehicle for a couple $100,000, and that's an asset. Like, that's something where you can say, oh, we've got this, and it's harder to for a administrator to say, well, we've got this cop and we're paying him 100,000 rather than 50,000. That turns into, it's a $500,000 expenditure over a 10-year period. And you think about, well, like, we could have an MRAP for that money. Like, we could have grenade launchers. Like, we'd have all kinds of cool stuff. So, like, do we really want to pay more, or we just pay people less? We need people who aren't quite as smart, who aren't going to be as upwardly mobile, and they're not going to be questioning and all that. But if you pay people more, you get better results from them. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a neurosurgeon or a plumber or anything. Like, the people who are going to slash their prices all the way to the basement, someone who's willing to take $5 an hour to pick fruit in the fields, it's because you have a very low skill level as far as your labor. So skilled labor costs more money. If we want cops that have a higher skill set, we need to pay them more, because ultimately people aren't going to do a very complex, difficult job for no money. And we seem to have no problem paying lawyers a lot of money. So we should
Unless they're defense
consider.
lawyers.
Well, true, but okay, no, actually, that's a great point. That's fair. But a different example would be to go back to like a cardiac surgeon or something.
Right.
Like anybody who cuts your chest open to work on your heart, that guy's getting paid. So we could argue that why that makes sense and all that, but police have a highly important function in our society, and we've always treated it ever since the very, very beginning as basically like, well, you're just like some guy with a stick. Like, just, if we need you, just show up and beat people. And as that job has evolved, it's maybe not the best job for the guy with the stick. Like, you still need a guy with the stick, but you need a guy who's also going to think his way through the problem and decide if he needs to use his words or needs to use his stick. And again, being a cop's a difficult job. Not trying to clown on him for the brute force aspect of it, but when you have a range of issues that a modern society wants, you probably need a different archetype for who the ideal policewoman or policeman is that is going to fill that role. And it's just higher standards, and it's like an old-timey doctor, who used to just like, well, have some whiskey, bite on this bullet, I'm going to pull this thing out, and I mean, you don't really need a lot of training or skill set for that. It was just kind of a different world. And we have not updated the police to meet the expectations of modern society to the extent that we should.
No, for sure. I think it's important that you mentioned the not mindset. I forgot the exact word that you used, but tasking. And a lot of police officers. We talked about this kind of last Sunday, but a lot of policing in general has kind of had this like warrior mindset where they're looking at the interacting with the community as kind of like an us versus them kind of thing, because you're the only thing that stands between modern society and chaos. Like, it's kind of ridiculous when you put it in those terms, but that's a lot of how the training goes. It's a warrior cop training, the killology, like we said during the last thing. And part of the things that people are kind of leaning towards is kind of getting away from that and going towards more of a guardian mentality. But I think I don't know, maybe guardian is not really the best way to go about it either. Maybe it should be the civil servant mentality. Maybe it should be maybe we should even go further away from the whole protect and not protect and serve, but maybe go away from the whole for lack of a better term, militarized mindset to it, more of a like civil servant mindset.
Okay.
I don't know. Just kind of something that we should probably think about going forward. One last thing that I wanted to mention about things that not necessarily are being talked about much is a lot of police departments, they don't necessarily have one on the books, but they still very much follow a quota system. And they have to make their numbers. So, they can only show a performance that they're performing their job if they're actually going and, doing so many traffic stops, doing so many ticket writings, finding so many drugs. These are things that are included in their quarterly evaluation reports, or however the police department in question does their follow-ups for policing, like how good your job you're doing. You have to create some numbers, so you have to actually go out and look and be quote unquote proactive, which is what they're kind of wanting to do, is being proactively addressing crime. But at the same time, it comes around as harassment. So I think one of the things was, I don't remember the exact city, but it was somewhere in the Northeast where you had a noticeable marked increase in traffic stops towards the end of the quarter, because that was where their evals were coming in, and they had to prove that they were actually doing their job and not slacking off. So you had a spike within the last 2 weeks or so of the quarter or month, however this particular one, I can't remember the exact details, but you had that spike. And these are associated with also revenue generation for cities. A lot of cities have pawned off raising taxes onto court fees and ticketing and things like that for disorderly conduct or whatever, and using that to fund their police departments, to fund their court systems. And so if we end quotas just in general, then you will probably see less of that happening, and thus less harassment of communities.
This is true.
And it was one of the big problems in Ferguson. So I don't think it was part of the consent decree with Ferguson between the Obama DOJ and the Ferguson Police Department. But you don't hear it talked about very much, and it's still one of those things that's very much a problem.
And police have long denied there's any kind of quota system. But when you kind of dig into that, there's certainly a metric system where it's not so much they need to get X amount per month, but if they don't get X amount per month, then it's questioned and it doesn't look good for them. So, it's one of those kind of word games where they're like, no, it's not like a quota. Like you don't have to pull over like 10, guys a day or whatever. Like that's not a thing where, okay, but if you don't, then it is not good for your career. So there's some disingenuous kind of play as far as like what's a quota and not.
Yeah. No, for sure. Do we have, before we call it a night, we've been streaming for about an hour and a half, or we can move on to a different topic. Does anybody have any questions for us? We covered a single topic pretty extensively. So if you have any questions for us on our opinions or anything for that matter, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. We are more than willing to talk, as you can see.
And if they don't, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So, what do you think about the People's Republic of Chaz?
Oh, I was hoping we were going to talk about that. I didn't want to bring it up, but yes.
No, I couldn't wait.
Oh, man.
Because it's sort of a law enforcement issue. It's kind of tied into all this.
It really is. So, I don't know how many people are aware of it. Simply because it's not getting a lot of play outside of the Seattle media, and in a couple of like conspiracy theory YouTube videos, and maybe Tucker Carlson now at this point, but he's like a day late and a dollar short as always. So my thoughts. So this is basically what happened was that protesters in Seattle do what protesters in Seattle tend to do. And they got tired of the police's shit and decided to take over an entire, 2 city blocks?
Well, it's 6 city blocks now.
Oh,
but yeah.
6 city blocks. Yeah. So
it was originally 2, but yeah.
Okay, so up to 6 city blocks now, and declared an autonomous zone from the police department.
It looks like some a Fallout settlement, like with like with that low rent kind of gate around it.
They pushed some of those like plastic orange barriers to operate as gates, and put up a little like sign of like free autonomous zone of city. What is it extended again? It's Chaz, but it's city hall autonomous zone. Yeah. City Hall autonomous zone.
Right. Yeah, the autonomous zone. Yeah.
And they basically do what some people think will happen if the police don't exist, and the community kind of just gets together, and anybody that has a gun is like, "Hey, man, go patrol the area, make sure crime doesn't happen." It's like it's a very City Watch kind of syndicate, maybe AMCOM kind of situation, but. I don't know.
I'm sorry. It's a Capitol Hill autonomous zone.
Capitol Hill autonomous zone
in Seattle.
Yeah, in Seattle. It seems to be a direct response to police officers basically telling the mayor to go fuck himself. So that puts it into a context where I don't want to be like, man, this is something that shouldn't happen at all. But at the same time, I don't necessarily like it, simply because I don't like the precedent it might set.
So what do we think about the mayor is basically, saying to Trump, because Trump has said that, he's going to roll in there and take that back, and they can't get away with this, and all that in these United States. And the mayor is like, Trump doesn't have any authority here, and these fine people can do whatever they want. And at this point, I can't even tell what's going on. Like, if this is some kind of like meta trolling of like the Seattle mayor against Trump, like I don't even know like who is even standing to gain from this or what. Like, apparently there's like some like low rent rapper who's like the warlord of Chaz, which is so 2020. Like I love that on every level. And Chaz is like just the perfect like kind of like douche bro name for this sort of operation. And then you have this mayor who on one hand is kind of hapless, but on the other is just like stone cold trolling Trump with this. And it's almost like she could take it back whenever she wants when she doesn't want to, even though it makes her look bad because it makes him look bad. I'm just like, I feel like everyone involved in this whole thing is just, it's like functionally like 14 years old and just being ridiculous.
I don't necessarily want to say that so much either. I mean, it's a tense situation, so the mayor's trying to like not escalate it.
Yeah.
And also, I want to say that they took over the area. Like an order came down. This is my understanding of the timeline. So an order came down from the mayor to not use flashbangs and tear gas anymore,
right?
And to pull back. And that order came down, and the police went in and started using flashbangs, tear gas, batons, and like just beating people. So I don't know. It's one of those situations where it's like, well, the police basically told the mayor to go fuck herself. And now we have a situation where the people are like, no, we want the police no longer in this area. Let's do something different, and we're going to protect ourselves until we get our demands met. It's like it's hard to gauge. It's I know that some people on the right would be like saying that. Some people, Republicans or conservatives, would say that this is similar to the Bundy situation where they took out over the federal building, whatever it was, in Parks area, BLM, I think.
Like the Bird Observatory or whatever that was.
Yeah. And I'm like, not really. There was a standoff because they violated the actual law. And then they're like, and then several months later, like, we're going to go take over a building and make our demands met, like make sure our demands are met. Like, nah, this was kind of a natural outgrowth of rising escalations between police and protesters that were protesting peacefully and then just got hit with abuse of force. And as liberal or leftist as people want to say Washington State is, the Occupy protests were met with extreme force. The G20 summit that happened in '99, I want to say it was, got met with extreme force. Like, leftist people might exist there and be more, maybe just under a majority, but they're not treated like it at all. So
I mean, again, I just love like the just the high end LARPy kind of comedy that we get. Like, they've torn up, I guess there's like a baseball field or like a park that they've started to do like local farming with. So they've they've torn it up. They now have like, they're planting seeds, they're going to grow their own food. And I'm like, what vault did you guys pop out of? Like, really? Like, are we really doing this? It's like, you can't just like leave your autonomous zone. Like, can't you set up like trade relations with the state of Washington and like arrange, for some kind of barter system? Like, you're really just going to go like complete like Anne Prim on this and just, so it's, on one hand, it's just so hilarious. Just that anybody would think that this is like a good idea. That like, oh yeah, I mean, this makes perfect sense. Let's just take over some couple blocks of Seattle and just roll with that. Like that would work. But then the lack of reaction or response, where like nobody really knows what to do about it. And then you've got like Trump, like 3 time zones away, who's just like running his mouth about this. He's been ranting about this all day because he's so upset about it. It's just like, Antifa is rising and they're taking territory and we need to put this down. I'm like, this is really just some like, you're like, anyone who's like been to or lived in Seattle or all that, you're like, okay, who those people are. Like, this is nothing serious. This is unfortunately just one of those things where, because the city council is also not serious, you've got a lot of unserious people who are just like in this giant like live action role playing like nonsense, and we're going to wait it out. It's not like the Bird Observatory where those guys are like heavily armed and freaking crazy, and those Bundy people were already in like armed standoffs, and who knows how that could have gone. One of them got shot, right? The guy in the blanket.
Yes, he did. He's a martyr for the movement and the Boogie Boys. Is his name also George?
Oh, I forget. He wasn't a Bundy, but he was part of their crew. He was the guy who gave the interview to MSNBC while hiding under a blanket. So it's that was just like some foreplay for what we were in for 2020. We were at the full 2020 action at that point.
Lavoie, Robert Lavoie. That's who it was.
That's right. That takes me back. How long ago was that?
Let's see.
That was in the era of Obama's tyranny, right?
Yeah, I thought it was 2015.
Okay. All right.
So
Right.
it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't. It was either
Yeah.
2014 or 2015. So it wasn't
Okay.
too terribly long ago. But yeah, they sued. Then apparently they sued the federal government in 2018. I don't know what became of it because I was just looking for his name. But
Right.
yeah,
Right.
he's one of the people that that helped kickstart the modern militia movement that are the Boogie Boys. So, well,
Those sexy sons of bitches.
they ruined Hawaiian Church for you though.
They really have. Although I'm still going to make it work. We're still going to bring the aloha. We're still going to get around it. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in the news that I need to jump in on that I need to ask you about. Let's see here.
Sure. Do we have any other questions from the audience though? Any questions? Feels weird asking this, but gotta do what you gotta do.
No, we always want to see if there's anything out there that needs to be brought up. But that's the problem with 2020 is that there's so much random wild shit going on nonstop that.
Right.
This is a totally minor thing, but like in one of Trump's tweets today, he thanked the Secret Service, but he called them the SS. And while that doesn't really sound like very much, the Secret Service acronym is actually USSS. It's the United States Secret Service. And the reason that they go by USSS and not SS is that SS were the secret police for the Nazis. So Trump thanking the SS in his tweet did not look good. And obviously Trump's a moron. He would have no idea about this because you'd need some functional like understanding of the US government or of like world history or anything. But the Secret Service do not go by the SS. Like that's not a thing with anybody. They very well go out of their way to only go by USSS. So
leave it. Are we sure that's not written by our?
No, we're not. That's the fun. That's part of the fun of 2020 is that we don't know what Stephen Miller wanted to slide across the plate.
God, the fact that he's still in the administration is not baffling. I mean, he's very well at making Trump feel good, but that he was ever allowed to be there in the first place, given his history, it's just the Republican Party has fallen so much, and yet not that much. Duality.
Oh, so, and this is kind of just a random thing, but the whole George Floyd thing has created so many changes, like just across the board. Like you think about like the statues coming down, even the discussion. Yeah. Oh, and we should talk really quick about the bases with the Confederate generals. So you may be familiar with a country singer. Her name's Lady Antebellum. So. And antebellum is Latin for after the war, and it's the post-war Civil War period. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a wistful commemoration of the lost cause of the Civil War of the Confederacy. So this has come up occasionally in her career, as far as like the questionable use of that term, because it really is romanticization of the Confederacy. And when you get down to it, is that you're just talking about the post-war period where, the Southerners wish that they hadn't lost the war. So she has changed her name to Lady A as of today. So it's no longer Lady Antebellum. It's just compacted so that the antebellum word is where it has that period before the Civil War. And oh no, I'm sorry. Whoa. Did I say after? Yeah, ante is before.
Said after. It's before.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm not illiterate. I'm sorry. No. It's bellum is war. It's the period before the war. Yeah. So like literally romanticizing the Civil War and the fact that they had lost, and that you kind of had this period of the golden age of the South, which was then ruined afterwards. So that is funny that you're getting this broad-based social pushback against everything Confederate. So you had NASCAR that just banned Confederate flags. So there was some driver that dropped out, and apparently he's just like, I'm not going to race anymore if we can't have the civil, the Confederate flag. And people observed that that was great that he was such a Confederate fan, because he also supported this Confederacy by never winning a race.
I heard
And
that he was pretty awful.
so good. But just to throw this out at you, apparently there's like 10 United States military organizations or installations,
Bases, yeah.
including the largest ones in the world, Fort Hood, Fort Bragg,
Yep.
respectively. That and I honestly never knew this, that they were actually named after Confederate generals. Now, just so you guys who like haven't been in the military know, like in theory, like the military cares about like history and all that, but in practice they don't. Like nobody knows anything about anything that we didn't see on TV or like in some movie. So your unit may have some like history, but like a base name is just a place name. Like you go to like, like Fort Drum, or you go to Fort, Benning, or you go to Fort Lewis.
Yeah.
The only reason that I know about Fort Lewis is that someone once mentioned to me, oh, it's named after Lewis and Clark. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's in Washington, Lewis and Clark. Like that's just some random like factoid that popped in my head because I had heard about Lewis and Clark. So the vast majority of like military base names, you just assumed it's named after some dead guy. Like you don't think about who it is. You just think that, well, they had it's just some guy, who knows, just it's some person that's just named after. So when they're like, oh, that there's like these 10 bases in the South and they're all named after Confederate generals. Not only that, but like they're named after guys who got their asses beat. Like they weren't even good. Like Fort Bragg, like the actual Confederate General Bragg, or even Hood, apparently those guys were morons. They got their asses kicked. It's just like, it's incredible that these people got the bases named after them, where it's like, not only were they traitors, but they weren't even good. Like it would be like naming like, I don't know, like some plaza in like downtown New York, like the Bin Laden Square or something. Like really? Like, I mean, A, that's crazy, but B, I'm like, at least Bin Laden like got a good hit in. Like a lot of these guys, like they didn't like Bragg.
No, there were a lot of crappy generals got named
crap.
after.
So,
we had a person in the group say that it was a lot of land being donated by families to the bases, and they would be named after somebody to honor in their family, and that was just total. Honestly, it was total bullshit. Fort Hood wasn't established until 1940. Like it was for World War II, so I don't want to. It was like 42 or 43 or something like that. To be an anti-tank training ground, and it was just land the federal government had, and next to land that they bought from somebody else. Like just bought it for a war effort. We just dropped a link in the chat for anybody that's still with us, to actually for a person that was complete and utter badass that Art and I talked about earlier today. I am not going to butcher his name, so you can read the link, but it is
Roy Benavidez.
Benavidez, that's how it is. Yes. Who was just a total badass and like single-handedly saved like 20 people from a somewhat botched military intelligence mission in Vietnam, and took like 20 shots and still lived and still like it saved his people. So
it's the craziest story. Like this guy literally like flew back into this like hostile fire area where the team that was there had just gotten like gunned down. Like the guys were all bleeding, like they couldn't move, like they're all just jacked up. And his own unit had been jacked up. So like it was just him. He was the only guy who was available. So rescue missions had already tried 3 times to like go in and get these guys. They couldn't. He's just like, I'll go. So long story short, this guy goes in, lands, single-handedly drags every one of these guys back to rescue helicopters and gets them away. He gets shot like several times. He gets clubbed, like he gets like burned, like just everything, like stabbed, like everything you can imagine. He keeps going back and forth, dragging these people. He just gets more and more wounded every time he goes back, and somehow saves them and also gets out alive. And it's just like absolutely nuts. Like it's absolutely crazy. And and they're like, or we could just name him after this like one general who like lost every time. And by the end, like apparently like General Hood was just like, you know what, just suicide charge the Union. Like I got nothing. Just like just fight to the death. Like I don't know.
It's just sad, and there's a lot of pushback of renaming it too, and it's just like, why you gotta rename it? And I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like, come on, things get named all the time. It's a place. Just let it go. Like, stop being a racist dickbag.
Well, that's a weird one because there's really no attachment to like a place name. Like, like Fort Bragg is just a place. And obviously, the 82nd Airborne, they take all of that very seriously. But, as far as the whole paratrooper thug life and all that. But fuck, I got 30 jumps. Fuck you. But the whole like the naming of things and like the history. Honestly, it doesn't matter nearly as much as people think it does. Like it really doesn't. Like there's all kinds of stuff that you could argue that is very valid to like unit history, but units get moved from post to post. Like they get reassigned, they get decommissioned, they get mixed into other units. Like that stuff just changes and life goes on. Like there's no formal, huge, deep attachment to any of that stuff. Like it's just, it's just, they're just names. I spent like, years in Baghdad on a post that was called Camp Slayer. It's just a name. Like it's just like it wasn't even like Slayer the band. Like it was like they had like a logo of like a guy with a sword. Like they just like literally just need to make something up on the fly. It was part of Victory Base Complex by the airport. But I'm like, really? Like they just, you had some like 18-year-old private who just like metal. It was like, we're gonna call this Camp Slayer. And they're like, oh, okay, fine, Slayer. Yeah, it's fine. And they just
probably exactly what happened.
No, but I'm serious. Like, and then they just like have different nouns for different bases, like Camp Loyalty or Fob Loyalty or whatever. And they're just words. Like they're just so you know which direction you're driving. Like, are we going north? We're Diamondback that way. Yeah. So it really doesn't matter. So like Trump making a big deal about it, like that's straight dog whistle. That's just purely like you got these Confederate guys who they're upset that all their statues are coming down and they want to feel like they're still holding on. But it's just funny. This wave is just pushing all kinds of change out there. Even statues of Columbus coming down. So anyway, it's just, I think that's very interesting that, as these things happen, you get change in places you didn't expect. So I guess was my overall point.
No, I mean, it's a good point to mention. For people that might not know, I actually was involved in some of the activism in Austin in order to get some Confederate iconography removed from the city of Austin. So the group that I was involved in, and still somewhat active with, and the group is still active, it's called De-Confederate Austin. They're pushing for other things and helping out with other protests and things like that. But yeah, we actually were pretty decently successful in helping convince the city council to vote for name changes, and school boards vote for name changes of various high schools and street signs and that sort of thing.
Nice.
So, yeah. Well, Art, do you have anything else that you'd like to cover?
No, I think that we kind of set everybody straight for today and told them what's up, and I think that that's important.
All right. Well, everybody, then with that, I am going to go ahead and call this a successful show. For those that might not know that joined us late or whatever, this is Crowdsourced Politics, and we are a political debate community that gave birth to a podcast of the same name. That is us. We're two members of the podcast. You can catch a new episode on crowdsourcepolitics.org on the second and fourth Tuesday of every month going forward. And you can catch us here live on the first and third Sunday of every month where we do a news roundup and talk about some of this stuff. And sometimes we'll have a live show here and there like tonight. So go ahead and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, wherever. And like always, keep your head up through the political storm. Oh, and we'll, if you're going to stick around, we're going to go ahead and raid a fellow Twitcher, who is I'm Really Important. He kind of covers news. He's been live for a bit, so we're going to go ahead and raid him. He's good people, so it's good to
President
face.
Trump is weighing in on efforts
Reliability is
to rename
everything.
military
So if your
bases in the
network's
US.
down.
I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. The autoplay on a news article I had open. Gotta hate that.
So I hate that Jack Posobiec guy, but he started calling Chaz Antifa-stan. And
Oh, of course he does.
that actually amuses me. That's maybe the funniest or most useful thing that's ever come out of his mouth.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. We're gonna raid I'm Really Important, and go ahead and drop a shout from CSP. Let them know that we're here. Thanks, guys.
Or your pants.
Or your pants.